All right. Before I talk about the midterm, I'm going to very briefly talk about switches and enums. There are a little bit of new syntax, but there's definitely no rocket science happening. It's very straightforward. The reason why I wanted to talk about it is because you could use them in your midterm. You don't need to. But we've been using them all the time with layout constraints, for instance. So I guess it makes sense. And also, like, 3 hours is a long time to work right now. No slides, so just a playground. So remember when we used to do this? Let constraint equals n as layout constraint, and then so like object is, well, I'm just gonna create new UI views here, but this n as layout attribute is the first one. This n as layout relation is another one. Come on, computer. Oh, come on, what is happening? Right, so these top equal and top things are enums. And the way you declare an enum is very easy. You just do, let's think about, let's use the like teaming thing again. So enum teams. And the only thing you do in an enum is you say case, for instance, dark, light. Let's keep it simple. So there's two teams, and you would do something like current. Oh, I don't think you need to. Current team equals teams dot dark and light. So this is what we've been doing. These are apples enums, and the cool thing is, you can't make any typos anymore. And you have a list of all the options. You could do this with strings, right? Just a string dark, just a string light. But then with switches, you'll see that it gets really cool. And you can even do something like, and that's what most people are going to do. Right now, it's just a name, so to say, but you can actually assign, for instance, an int to it. And you would maybe wonder why you would want to use that, and you can instantiate one using that integer. So if I pass in 0 here, it would be dark, and light would be 1, which is really easy because integers are, for instance, very easy to persist on the device. Wow, I would even have to look if you could do persistency on enum, but integers for sure. So if you just pass in, but maybe by default it isn't int. I think you can do this. You can do string even. It's definitely not a string by default, but it might be. I don't know. So you could do whatever you want here. Enum string being dark. So this is very easy to persist in, and then you can do raw value, and then you're going to have the dark team. But I think integers are most of the time the way to go because they're so easy. It doesn't get much easier than integer in life. And so, like I said, so we can do, I'm going to keep this, but comment it out. Teams.dark, right? And the thing that works really well with enums is switches. And so remember how we've been doing something like this? It's been a while, but if current team equals dark, let's create another one, case default equals 2. You would be able to do something like this, right? Else if current team equals, so there's two options, teams.light, which is the same thing as just period light, right? That's the same thing like with nslate attribute dot top or just dot top. So this is how we would have solved this previously with if-else statements, and this is going to work perfectly. But the annoying thing is that this is not exhaustive. This is very dumb in some sense. And there's a smarter thing called a switch. And if we write the same thing in the switch statement, you would do something like this. You would do switch current team. You open up your curly braces. Let me also, I think so you open up your curly braces, and then you can do the same thing saying case dark. The current team, oops, dark. Case light. And if I would stop now, it says, switch must be exhaustive. Consider adding a default clause. So Xcode is smart enough right now, switching over current team, it sees that current team is an enum, and it's saying you didn't cover all your bases. And that's fine. You cannot cover all your bases if you don't want to do that. You can do, just like we do here with an else, there's the default case. So by default, print team is something else, right? But if your case is exhaustive, default team. And now it should probably say default will never be executed because it's smart enough to see that you covered dark, light, and default case. So that's like the cool thing with enums, that they allow you to write safer code. With an if-else statement, Xcode does not check if you are caching something, if you're not. So with a switch statement and cases, you can do this. But there's nothing that's stopping you from using a switch when for an integer, for instance. So let's say let sum int equals 10. You can switch over that too. I think you do smaller than 10. Let's see, wait. Switch statement on int. Maybe you can't do it with operators, but you can do something like this. 13, 14, 15. But the problem is with this, that this is not an exhaustive statement, right? It could be whatever you want it to be, so you always need a default case. And at that point, in my opinion, you might as well use an if-else statement. But the combination of a switch statement with an enum is like where it gets really, really powerful. And enums are just, I use them a lot to avoid typos when there's 2 or 3 options. For instance, steaming is a good example. With my pregnancy app, the app had like a method being preventing, planning, was just tracking, enum. All these things where you have like a set amount of options. Enums are great, and you can just switch over them using switch statements. And there's also nothing stopping you from, if we open up a real project, or I can actually do it in here. So let's say we have a button 1, type UI button, that's button 2, type UI button. So these could be outlets from your storyboard almost. And then a button equals button 1, for instance. You can switch over a button. A button is button 1. And then case button 2. So you can do way more than just the default integers and strings, but again, you need a default case here because buttons is not an exhaustive set of things that you can do with it. So a button is a different button. It just forces you to write some safer code to not forget about cases, to not make typos. So that's all there is to it, basically. Does this make sense? Maybe you're a little bit late. So this was, remember how we did NS layout relation dot equal, for instance? In like, yeah. So this is the same thing. If we look at
so enum is some object that has different states.
NS layout constraint, for instance.
Yeah.
See? NS layout relation, NS layout attribute, so they just have a bunch of them in there. And you could store all of these as just strings, but then people start to make typos, and these are just very easy to also do a switch statement over. So enums are almost all over Swift. They're also they're not new in Swift. They are also in normal C. So they were in Objective-C too, but they got a lot cooler in Swift. And so the reason why I was selling here, May, is that if you say that they're of type int, which it is by default, I think, so although, yeah, Apple doesn't do it. Maybe it's in A0, 1, and 2. Once we see persistency, it's very easy to write to the hard drive when the user closes your app, and the next time you want to still have that number. Let's say you have a team option that they can choose. If they choose the dark team tomorrow, or tomorrow they still want it to be the dark team. And you could just write this integer to the persistent memory, which we haven't seen yet, but let's say the next day you retrieve that, you could do current or teams, and then this would be the persistent integer we got from our persistent data stack, and then the team would be dark again. So that's why you do this colon and you just assign 0, 1, and 2, because 0, 1, and 2 is very easy to write down or write away to memory. And you can also do something like this: print current team dot raw value, and that will print a 0 again. So it's very easy to create an enum from an integer and get the integer out of the current enum value. And then, so raw value is the 0, 1, and 2. So the raw value in this case is an integer. This will make more sense if we do persistency, and then I'll use this.
Raw value apply to all types of enum. It's
always like, yeah, all the enums have a raw value. It's actually a fun thing to do once we do persistency, just like make a little team thing. Then we can put in notifications again. But yeah, so switches are very useful. Again, they're not going to save you or anything. Like, they're not different than if else. Well, they are in the sense that they'll force you to either cover all your options by clear, dark, light, and default. And if not, you have a default case that catches all the other things, which would be like the else clause on an if-else statement. That's actually a dumb name here because there's a default case too. Let's call the second team, I don't know. And so it will also see if I keep my default here, it's going to say, but the enum of type team doesn't have a default case anymore. So it's like really smart in the way that it forces you to have everything up to date everywhere. So this would be salmon now. And everything else would be in default print something else. But in this case, this doesn't make any sense because we covered all three of them. So Xcode will actually say default will never be executed because you have dark, light, and salmon. If you would get rid of salmon, though, this would be valid. So salmon would go into the default case right now.
Because they're only 3 days.
So if I would change it to, so it's dark right now. If I change this to salmon, it's going to say something else. So it got here right now. Because we don't have salmon in our switch statement. If we brought it back and we did case salmon, current team is salmon, then we can get rid of these again. And now it's going to print the current team is salmon. That's all there is to it. Does this make sense? Yes? No?
Oh yeah.
Useful?
Yeah.
I think it really is. Again, you could just write dark light and salmon into persist, like anywhere. You could pass that along from one view controller to the other one. But this is so much safer. You're not going to make errors. You don't need to do if current team equals string dark, else if current team equals string light. So it's just a little nice syntactical sugar on top of like a string, for instance, or compared to a string. Cool. All right. That's it. That's all I wanted to show you today. So the remaining time is the midterm for today and tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Monday. So let me show you what the perfect example looks like. I'm very hesitant to show this, but so ideally you make a calculator. And I'm going to be very honest, if you came to me today saying you need to make a calculator tonight, I would start laughing at you and I would say, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. Because calculators are hard. They are very easy. The first steps are very easy, but once you get into the fact that, for instance, I should not be able to, we'll see in Apple's calculator, this is already not allowed. You can't do 0, 0, 0. So this is actually not perfect either. But in general, calculators are hard, right? Like there's a lot of stuff you have to take into account to, your period number, all these things. So even I would be like, okay, that's going to take me quite a lot of days. And there's definitely resources out there on the internet of what the basics of a calculator exist out. This is a very common problem that a lot of people solve. I think it's one of the, I'm 100% sure this is the midterm in Stanford's iOS course, or not the midterm, but it's like one of their first homeworks they have to do. And so it's a very common computer science problem to fix. No computer science background, so never had to make one myself. But so doing research is going to be helpful for this because you're not the first ones creating a calculator. There were 4 classes of J students before you to start with, so definitely not the first one. And the only advice I can give you is start simple. And if you don't like, or if you don't want to worry about the actual calculation part of it, start with building your user interface. You can definitely make this looking like the Apple calculator. You don't have to. If you want to have 100% match, it's going to be pretty hard in the sense that it has like these little small gaps in between your keys. But other than that, I think you can get it pretty close. So you can start with the UI if you don't want to get into the code immediately. If you do want to get into the code, you will get very far by just using integers, plus minus multiplication, and subtraction. Actually not integers, but floats. So if you don't worry about this percentage and about decimal points in general, yeah, integers, you're gonna get pretty far. And I have to be honest, like for some people, that's how far they will get probably. And I'm already happy if your UI looks great, if it works in both directions, because that's also gonna be something. And if you get it there, I'm happy, but definitely do not stop there if you have the time. This is what it should look like. So this is the solution I got from GA, and to give you an idea of how much code that went into this, if my computer allows me to show you. So the view controller, that's also the first interesting thing, is very small. It's 100 lines of code. So you could put everything in your view controller, but you shouldn't. I mean, if that's, I definitely have e-share students with a view controller of 600 lines of code, and that's fine. If you want to do that, that's totally fine by me. I don't suggest it though, because you're going to make your own life harder. But so they have 250 plus 150 plus 120 plus 130. So like altogether like 500 lines of code. So this is a lot. I want to start simple. We are here for questions, especially also all layout is going to be very challenging. Remember how we did the like equal width things? This is all that, right? If you look at your storyboard, all of these are equal width to each other, and they span the entire width and height of this part. So once you get it, it's just super easy. Once you, if you apply what we did last week with 3 items to 12, or how many are there? 16, 20, you should be fine. So that's it. That's all I have to say about it. This is your midterm.
Did you say we should use code? We use code for all layouts?
For what?
Did you say we should use code for all layouts, or should?
No, no code for all layout. I mean, you're totally welcome to. I had one student do it in iOS DC3 class, but yeah, probably like 800 lines of layout code just for laying out his calculator. And at least, bare minimum, I do want a functional calculator with integers in perfect auto layout, or I can pass you for this. I'm not going to fall over like floating numbers necessarily and all those things, but auto layout needs to be there together with the very basics of doing calculations. So you have today for that. You have Monday, and there's going to be office hours this weekend too. So there's definitely going to be plenty of opportunity to sit down and talk about this. The thing is also though, there's 700,000 ways to fix this problem. So it's also not guaranteed if we do sit down that we can necessarily fix. If you are like 70% there in your way and that way is just not going to work, then I can't like redo everything for you. So cool. Good luck. Also, all layout questions are definitely easier to answer in class than, no, in the sense that I can easily help on Slack with code questions, harder with all layout questions. Something to keep in mind.